She hadn't stepped foot in her grandpa's shed for over 20 years. But when Hannah Mitchell finally opened that rusted door, what she found inside didn't just change her life. It shattered everything she thought she knew about her family. Beneath the dust and silence lay a hidden secret one her grandfather took to the grave, and her mother swore she'd never speak of again. Letters, photos, a birth in the middle of a storm, and a brother she never knew existed. If you think Grandpa's shed was just a place for tools, think again. What Hannah uncovered 20 years later will break your heart and might just help you find your own truth. Stay with us because this story is one you'll never forget. Let's get started. Hannah Mitchell had always carried with her the scent of motor oil and sawdust, the echo of old country tunes crackling through a battered radio, and the image of her grandfather hunched over a workbench, humming softly while fixing the unfixable in that weathered shed behind the house. After he passed, the shed became a ghost, unopened, untouched. The red paint dulled to an almost sorrowful gray, the hinges sagging under the weight of time and silence. No one dared to go near it, not even her. Hannah left for the city when she turned 18, chasing something she couldn't name, trying to outrun the ache that losing him left behind. But time has a strange way of pulling us back. Now, 20 years later. She stood once again on that porch, staring at the backyard, the shed barely visible through overgrown grass and tangled vines. Her hands shook as she walked toward it, each step stirring up memories she thought had settled for good. The door groaned open. Dust danced in the air like spirits. And there, hidden beneath layers of time, she saw something that didn't belong. Something that had been waiting just for her. At first, Hannah couldn't tell what she was looking at. The light from the small, grimy window barely cut through the shadows, and the air inside the shed was thick still, like it hadn't been stirred in years. Dust clung to everything, to the shelves lined with rusted tools, to the workbench where old jars of screws sat like relics, to the faded photos curling under cracked glass frames. But in the far corner, beneath a threadbare tarp, something stood out. It wasn't a toolbox. It wasn't a lawnmower or an old wooden chair. No. It was taller, shaped like a cabinet maybe, but oddly narrow and wrapped so deliberately, almost reverently, that it stopped her in her tracks. She stepped closer, the wooden floor groaning beneath her boots. Her hands hovered over the tarp. Something about it felt sacred. With a deep breath, she peeled the cover back, and what she saw made her heart lurch. It was a wooden trunk, old, handmade. The surface was carved with delicate vines and initials she recognized immediately: W. M. William Mitchell. Her grandfather. He had never mentioned this, never shown it to her. And he told her everything. Or so she'd thought. Her fingers traced the carving as though it might speak to her. Then, carefully, she unlatched the rusted metal clasp. It groaned as it gave way, like something exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. Inside were layers, faded blankets, yellowed newspaper, and beneath them, letters, dozens, tied together in twine, brittle and fragile with time. She pulled out the top bundle and unfolded the first page. The handwriting hit her instantly. It was her grandfather's looping script, full of care, full of purpose. If you're reading this. The letter began. Then I'm no longer there to tell you face to face. But I've left you something. Something only you were meant to find. Hannah felt the tears rise before she could stop them. Her hands trembled. Her lips parted like she might say his name aloud. But no sound came. The letter continued, He wrote about the war, not the one he fought in, but the one he lived after. The battle with silence, with grief, with secrets that were never his to keep but ones he carried anyway. He spoke of a promise he'd made to a friend who had no family left, a friend who had come to him in need. Hannah's brow furrowed. She flipped through more pages, some written in haste, others almost poetic. Slowly, a picture began to form. Her grandfather had taken someone in, a woman. During a time when the world had turned its back on her. She was young and afraid, and not from around here, and she had a child. For months, maybe longer. They stayed hidden in the basement of the house, in the shed, anywhere they could stay out of sight. He fed them, protected them, risked everything, and when it was finally safe, they vanished. He never heard from them again, but he never forgot. In the trunk, tucked between the letters, was a small, faded photograph. Hannah lifted it carefully. It showed a woman wide-eyed, with short hair and tired arms, and a boy, maybe 4 or 5, clutching a worn-out toy. On the back, scrawled in pencil, Amira and Noah, 1952. Hannah sat down. Hard, on the stool beside the trunk. Her whole body felt different, like something deep inside her had cracked open. She'd always known her grandfather was kind. But this was something else. This was sacrifice. This was courage. And it was love, the quiet, unwavering kind that didn't ask for recognition, that didn't make headlines, that just did what was right because it was right. She wiped her eyes and reached back into the trunk. More letters, a journal, a child's drawing of a sunflower house, labeled Grandpa Will's Garden, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a delicate cloth, was a necklace, a tiny gold locket, etched with the letter A. Inside a photo of a smiling baby girl. The resemblance was unmistakable. Her breath caught. It was her. She was the baby. Her fingers clenched around the locket, her chest aching with the weight of a truth she never even knew she had lost. Her grandfather hadn't just saved someone. He had saved her. Hannah sat in silence for a long time, the necklace resting in her palm like it carried the weight of 1,000 questions. The shed, once just a backdrop of childhood summers, now felt like a portal, like the air around her had thickened with meaning. She looked down at the photo again. A baby with wide eyes. Her eyes, she wanted to believe it was a coincidence. She wanted to believe it was another child. But her heart already knew. This wasn't just a stranger's story. It was hers. Her grandfather hadn't just helped a frightened young woman and her son. He had helped her mother. A cold tremble passed through her body. Why hadn't anyone told her? She stood abruptly, letters tumbling from her lap, and stumbled out of the shed into the sunlight. The yard was the same, overgrown, silent, but the world looked different. The sky too wide, the house too small to contain everything it now held. Inside. She paced the kitchen floor, the old linoleum creaking beneath her feet. Memories stirred her mom standing at the stove, humming while she stirred soup, her gentle voice, her distant gaze. There had always been something she couldn't explain, a quiet grief behind her mother's smile. She used to think it was just the way life aged people. Now she wasn't so sure. Hannah dug through the cabinets and drawers, looking for anything, any clue her grandfather might have left behind in the house. An old tin box behind the dishes, a rusted key taped under a drawer. She moved like a woman possessed, driven not by fear, but by the raw ache of needing to understand. And then in the attic, tucked inside an old cedar chest beneath faded quilts, she found it. A sealed envelope. Her name written on the front in her grandfather's hand. Hannah! No dear, no flourish, just her name, as if he knew one day she'd come looking, as if he knew the past would find its way back. With trembling fingers, she opened it. I never wanted to burden you with what I kept in silence, but I also didn't want to die with the truth buried beneath my feet. Your mother's name wasn't always Claire Mitchell. She was born Amira Rose. And you were born in that shed, wrapped in a blanket your brother picked out himself. Hannah gasped. The letter slipped from her fingers. Born in the shed. The same place where she'd spent summers chasing butterflies and hiding from thunderstorms. The same place she had nearly forgotten. The world tilted on its axis. She picked up the letter again. When your mother came to me, she was scared out of her mind. She had been disowned by her own family. She had nowhere to go. No one. I couldn't let her sleep on the street with 2 children. I gave her the shed to hide in, fixed it up with insulation and blankets. Told no one, not even the neighbors. You were born during a thunderstorm. I remember the lightning flashing as she screamed. I remember holding you in my hands. So tiny, so full of life. You were a miracle. Hannah, you were the beginning of something brave. Her knees gave out, and she sat on the attic floor, tears streaking her face. It wasn't just that she had found a secret. She had found the beginning of herself. She always wondered why her mother never talked about her childhood. Why she changed the subject when asked where she was born. Why there were no baby photos before age 2. Because those first 2 years were spent hiding in plain sight. Because her story didn't begin in a hospital with balloons and flowers. It began in silence, in fear, in love. She pressed her forehead to her knees and let herself cry, not for the pain of what was hidden, but for the courage of those who had chosen to protect her. Her grandfather, her mother, even her brother Noah, whoever he was now if he was still alive. Suddenly, the need to find him became overwhelming. She returned to the shed and began sorting through every single letter, photo, and paper. One of the envelopes was addressed differently, its corners torn from too many hands holding it. Inside was a postcard, postmarked from St. Louis, the date 2006. Pop, I hope this reaches you. Amira told me you wouldn't want to be found, but I needed to say thank you. I joined the army. Thought you'd be proud. If you ever want to reach out, here's my unit number. Noah. He had tried to come back. And her grandfather never replied. The silence wasn't cruelty, it was fear. But now, Hannah knew what she had to do. She folded the postcard and held it to her chest. She wasn't just uncovering the past anymore. She was going to finish what her grandfather started. She was going to bring the family back together. That night, Hannah didn't sleep. She couldn't. The silence in the house no longer felt familiar. It felt haunted. Not by ghosts, but by memories that had been buried too deep. For too long. Every corner she looked at now whispered differently. The kitchen sink where her mother used to wash dishes. That was the same woman who once hid in fear, who held her in trembling arms in the dark corners of a shed, hoping the world wouldn't find them. Hannah had always seen her mother as quiet, maybe even cold at times. But now she understood it wasn't coldness. It was armor. It was what you build when the world tells you you're not welcome, what you wear when survival becomes your only inheritance. And she had worn it well. Too well? Because Hannah never suspected a thing. She sat at the kitchen table. The letter from her grandfather unfolded in front of her, the edges soft from being held over and over again. The photo of Amira and Noah rested beside it like a quiet witness. The locket hung around her neck now, the little A against her skin warm, grounding. Everything she thought she understood about her life. shifted. It wasn't just about where she was born. It was about who she was born from. A woman who had risked everything, and a man who had chosen to stand in the gap between judgment and love and protect her family like his own. Hannah looked out the window toward the shed. The same shed she had once run past without a second thought. The same shed she had played beside with muddy knees and scraped palms. And now, it felt like holy ground. That morning, she called her mother. Her voice cracked as she said hello. Claire, no. Amira sounded tired, as usual, not surprised by the call, but unsure of what it meant. Mom? Hannah hesitated. I found the trunk in Grandpa's shed. Silence. Then I always knew one day you'd ask. I didn't ask, Hannah said gently. It found me. She told her everything about the letters, the locket, the photo of Noah, about the journal entries, the hidden birth, the storm the night she was born. Amira didn't cry, but Hannah could hear her breathing shift. You weren't supposed to find it, her mother said quietly. It was meant to die with him. And me. Why? Because the world we came from, it didn't want us. And I was tired of explaining myself. I wanted to protect you, not with lies, but with silence. Hannah's eyes welled up. You protected me with love, she whispered. But you never had to be ashamed of how it started. I wasn't ashamed of you, her mother said, her voice suddenly trembling. I was ashamed of the world, of what it made me do, how it made me hide. For the first time in her life, Hannah felt like she was talking to her mother, not the guarded woman she had grown up with, but the girl who had once clutched a newborn in a stranger's shed and whispered promises into the dark. I want to find Noah, Hannah said. There was a pause. Then a soft sigh. I don't know where he is, her mother replied. I lost track of him years ago. He was always a wanderer. He was already old enough to remember. Too much. He didn't want to stay. He tried to write. Hannah said, Grandpa never answered. Amira's voice broke for the first time. I begged him not to. I told him it would only bring more pain. But now, I think I was wrong. There it was. A confession, a crack in the wall. And in that moment, Hannah no longer saw her mother as a mystery. She saw her as a survivor. The next few days changed everything. Hannah dove headfirst into the search for Noah. Social media, veteran groups, local records, anything that could trace the steps of a boy who'd once drawn sunflowers and whispered lullabies to his baby sister in the back of a shed. But something else changed, too. Her purpose. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was about truth, legacy, redemption. She contacted a local museum, then a journalist, then a history professor from the university an hour away. At first, they were skeptical. But when she showed them the letters, the photos, the journal, the diary of survival, their tone shifted. They asked to visit the shed. She said yes, and as she stood beside them, watching them photograph the old trunk, handle the documents with gloved hands, ask respectful, reverent questions, she felt something powerful rise in her chest. Not grief, not even pride, but clarity. She hadn't just uncovered the past. She had inherited it. She was no longer just Hannah Mitchell, woman who returned to her grandfather's house. She was the living bridge between silence and story, between hiding and healing, and now that the truth had found her, she wouldn't let it be forgotten. In the weeks that followed, the shed changed. Not in structure, it was still the same weathered frame, still groaned with every breeze, still smelled faintly of pine and rust. But it was alive now, with something deeper. It breathed with memory. It whispered with history. And Hannah. She had changed too. She no longer walked through the backyard distracted or absent-minded. She moved with intention, with reverence. Every time she opened that shed door, She felt like she was stepping into a sacred space, a place of truth, of rebirth. But it wasn't enough to know the truth. She needed to share it. The museum's historian had returned twice already, taking notes, sketching the carvings on the wooden trunk, asking for permission to catalog the letters. He offered to preserve the shed's contents, and perhaps, one day, include them in a curated exhibit about forgotten families and hidden histories. But Hannah hesitated. That didn't feel right. This wasn't something that belonged behind glass. It wasn't just an artifact. It was a story. Her story. Her mother's. Her grandfather's. And it needed to be told here, where it began in the soil, in the wood, in the silence that had once held generations of pain. So she came up with an idea. A bold one. She would turn the shed into a living memorial, not a tourist attraction, not a cold presentation of historical facts, but a space where people could walk inside and feel what was once hidden there. She would rebuild it, but not to erase its age. No, every nick, every crack, every worn board would stay. She would reinforce the floor, add safe lighting, and carefully display the letters, photographs, and locket inside glass panels she would build herself. And the diary that would sit at the center, open to the page where her mother described Hannah's birth under a sky full of thunder. It wasn't just about remembering. It was about honoring, and offering others the same question that had changed her. What stories are we still burying? The town council didn't make it easy. At the first meeting, they listened politely until she mentioned race, exclusion, the fact that her family had hidden in a shed because official shelters wouldn't take them in. That made people shift in their chairs. A few coughed. One older man muttered something about letting the past be the past. But Hannah didn't flinch. She stood tall, diary in hand, photo of Noah in her back pocket, and she told the truth, not with anger, but with clarity. My grandfather saved lives in silence because your policies left them to die, she said. This shed might be the only proof left of that injustice, and I will not let it be erased. The room was quiet. Someone finally clapped. Then another. And slowly, approval came not all at once, and not without reluctance, but it came. With limited funding and a lot of her own savings, Hannah began the transformation. The first day she cleared the floor, she found an old toy rattle buried beneath a rotted plank. She held it like treasure. Maybe it was hers, maybe it wasn't, but it would stay. Neighbors began to notice. Some came by, curious. Some brought meals. A few brought memories. An elderly woman named Mrs. Avery, who lived 2 doors down, confessed that she remembered a young woman with a baby and a boy visiting the house years ago, but was told never to mention it. I thought she was a niece. She said, "Your grandfather. He always said, she's just family. That's all that matters." Hannah smiled. He was right. One afternoon, a schoolteacher came by after seeing the article in the paper. She asked if she could bring her students once it was finished. "I want them to know that history doesn't just live in museums," she said. "It lives in our backyards, in our blood." Hannah nodded, her throat tight. That night, as she sat on the shed's porch, the same spot her grandfather must have once rested on, after long days of hiding courage behind silence, she felt something lift inside her. For so long, her family's history had been wrapped in shame, in secrecy, in fear. But now, it was wrapped in purpose. And hope? She still hadn't found Noah. But she would. The postcard had a partial return address, a lead, a name. And she had begun sending messages to veteran groups, posting old photos in military forums, even reaching out to someone at the Department of Veterans Affairs. She didn't know if he would answer, but she had opened the door. The rest, she believed, would come when it was meant to, because this wasn't just about finding lost family anymore. This was about reclaiming every single voice that history tried to silence. And her grandfather's shed. It was no longer a place for forgotten tools. It was a monument. A homecoming. A beginning. The transformation of the shed was nearly complete. Where once there had been shadows, now there was light, soft, golden lighting that made the old wooden beams glow like they had been waiting decades to be seen. The letters were mounted, the diary protected in glass, the photograph of Amira and little Noah framed above a small plaque that read, "Sanctuary and silence, a family's hidden strength." Hannah stood in the center of the room, arms crossed, tears burning behind her eyes. She hadn't expected it to feel this heavy. Not sad, exactly just full. The kind of fullness that comes from understanding the weight of where you came from. It was more than a shed now. It was a soul. But something still tugged at her. Noah, she still hadn't found him. Despite the posts, the calls, the outreach, nothing. Some nights she dreamed about him. A little boy with wide eyes, clutching a handmade toy, sometimes older in a military uniform, staring back at her across a room, not knowing who she was. And then one Tuesday afternoon, it happened. She had just returned from the grocery store when she noticed a man standing at the edge of the yard, middle-aged, worn denim jacket, salt and pepper beard, tall. Still, he didn't say a word, just looked at the shed, like it was something he thought he'd never see again. Hannah's heart stopped. She walked slowly toward him, the grocery bags slipping from her hands, fruit rolling across the driveway unnoticed. The man turned to her eyes already wet. "Is it really still here?" he asked, voice cracked like dry wood. She couldn't speak, she just nodded. He stepped forward, but not toward her toward the shed, and then paused. "Does she know?" he whispered. Hannah's voice finally returned, shaky and small. She remembers everything. He looked down, wiped at his face roughly. "I wasn't sure if I should come." "You're Noah," she said, more to confirm what her heart already knew. He nodded slowly. "And you're the baby, from the thunderstorm." That's when her knees buckled. Right there, on the grass. She fell to her knees and wept deep, guttural sobs, the kind that don't ask permission. He knelt with her, arms wrapping around her as if they'd done it 1,000 times before. And for a moment, there were no words. Just breathing, just holding, just finally being found. They sat on the porch for hours. He told her everything. About the foster homes, the army, the wandering, the pain of not knowing where he belonged, how he had written to her grandfather and never heard back, how he assumed the door had been closed for good. He never blamed anyone. He just moved on. But something had always pulled at him. A dream of a shed, a memory of warmth during a world of cold. And then, one day, someone from a veterans group forwarded him a photo, a post Hannah had made, asking about a man named Noah who once lived in hiding in a shed behind a red farmhouse. He didn't sleep that night. He got in his truck the next morning and drove across 2 states without telling a soul, because something in his bones said it's time to go home. The next morning, Hannah called her mother. When Amira answered, all Hannah said was, "Someone's here!" There was a long silence. Then Amira whispered, "Is it really him?" Hannah choked back a tear. "It's him, Mama." He remembers everything. "I'll be there in 2 hours. Her mother said—" When Amira stepped out of her car, she looked smaller than Hannah remembered. Her shoulders slightly stooped, her hands trembling. Noah stood near the porch, watching her. It was as if time folded in on itself, the years peeling back in one breathless instant. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They walked. And when they reached each other, Amira simply lifted a hand and touched his face, her fingers shaking as if afraid he'd vanish again. "My Noah," she said, voice cracking. He closed his eyes.
"I missed you, Mama."
Then she pulled him to her chest and wept into his shoulder. Her cries weren't loud. They were low and deep and full of every year she had spent believing she might never see her son again. And Hannah, standing a few feet away, couldn't hold back anymore. She cried too, for the child who'd been hidden, for the mother who'd sacrificed, for the boy who grew up with silence and still found his way home, and for the man, her grandfather, who had given them the one thing the world refused to offer, a second chance. The shed never closed again. From the day Noah returned, it became something more than memory. It became meaning. Word spread through the town, and then beyond. Teachers brought students. Reporters came with notebooks. Strangers arrived holding quiet curiosity and sometimes pain. Pain that they, too, had buried somewhere deep in their family's history. Some visitors cried. Others just stood in silence. One woman knelt at the diary display and whispered, "My grandmother told me we hid, too." And always, Hannah stood quietly by the door, not as a guide, not as a historian, but as a witness, a keeper of something fragile and sacred. Sometimes Noah stood with her. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His presence was enough, the proof that healing doesn't come in thunder, but in the quiet moments of truth spoken aloud, after years of silence. The town, at first hesitant, had shifted. There was still resistance. Of course, there always is when the past is uncomfortable. But something about the way Hannah carried the story, not with bitterness, but with dignity, made it impossible to look away. The mayor eventually visited and cried. A month later, the town declared the shed a site of historical remembrance. They installed a plaque at the front gate, with an inscription Hannah helped write. "In this place, silence once kept fear alive." Now it set stories free. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the fields, painting the sky in the softest amber, Hannah sat between her mother and her brother on the steps of the shed. None of them spoke for a long time. The breeze rustled the tall grass. A bird sang somewhere near the fence line. Then Noah chuckled softly and said, "Remember how we used to draw stars on the inside walls?" Amira smiled. "You made me promise not to erase them, even when they faded." Hannah turned to them, eyebrows raised. "Wait, what stars?" They looked at each other like two people remembering a shared secret. Noah stood, stepped inside, and gently pulled back the curtain covering one wall. There they were, barely visible, drawn in pencil, childlike, imperfect, but stars nonetheless. A whole galaxy scribbled by a scared little boy who had no sky to look up at, so he made his own. Hannah stared at them, a lump rising in her throat. "They're still here," she whispered. Noah nodded. "Some things never leave, even when we think they're gone." Later that night, long after the visitors had gone and the town lay still, Hannah returned to the shed one last time. Alone, the warm light cast soft shadows against the walls. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet like an old friend sighing. She stood in the center and closed her eyes. Breathed in. It smelled like cedar and old pages and dust kissed by time. She reached for the locket at her neck and held it tight. "I don't know what you expected, Grandpa," she whispered, "but I hope this is what you wanted." Somewhere inside her, she felt the answer. Not in words, but in peace. This story isn't just about Hannah. It's not just about her grandfather, or Amira, or Noah. It's about all of us. It's about the secrets we keep, and the courage it takes to uncover them. It's about how silence can be both prison and protection, and how the truth, even when it hurts, is always worth telling. But more than anything, it's about love. The kind of love that builds walls in the middle of the night, that shares food when there's not enough, that hides in a shed so a baby girl can have a chance at life. That kind of love doesn't die. It leaves marks in wood, in ink, in memory. And if we're lucky, it finds someone brave enough to go back and open the door. That's what Hannah Mitchell did. She didn't just enter her grandfather's shed. She walked straight into her family's truth and came out with a story that now belongs to the world. May we all be so brave. Anyone can uncover the truth if they're brave enough to open the door. As dusk settled gently over the Mitchell family's backyard, Hannah didn't return to the city or close the chapter on what she had found. Instead, she opened a new page not to rewrite the past, but to share it. She began building workshops for children and young adults, especially those from families with hidden stories, silenced histories, or lost roots to learn how to listen, how to ask, and how to honor the voices that came before them. The little girl once born in hiding had become the woman who made space for others to be seen. Because for Hannah, and for those who would follow family, wasn't just about blood. It was about truth. And truth, once spoken aloud, doesn't just heal the past. It lights the way forward. The end. Up next, 2 more unforgettable stories that will stay with you long after the credits roll. Click to continue and hit subscribe if you believe that every voice deserves to be heard.